Hello and welcome to Enlightened Empaths, your community for the spiritually awakened, where we discuss, explore, and connect with fellow empaths, healers, intuitives, and seekers. Hello, empaths. We hope you're having a great start to your week. Today, we're going to be talking about the power of music, community, and art to tell your stories, connect with others, and make a positive impact on the world. And joining us today to help us do that is Mike De La Rocha. Mike is a musician, speaker, and advocate for criminal justice reformation and so much more. He's co-founded Revolve Impact, a creative agency that shifts narratives, amplifies social justice movements, and drives change through campaigns, innovative storytelling, and community engagement. He's also the author of Sacred Lessons, Teaching My Father to Love. Mike has performed and spoken all over the world, including South by Southwest, TEDx, Chicago Ideas Week, and NPR, just to name a few. Throughout his career, he has shared the stage with globally acclaimed artists such as Ben Harper, Foster the People, Jackson Browne, and Cypress Hill. I could go on and on and on because his bio does not end there, but it is a short show, so I'm just going to welcome you. Mike, we're so happy and honored to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on here. Big fan. So
We We really appreciate it. So let's start off. I want to talk about, I was watching your TEDx talk and it was really, really good and engaging. And you talked about the importance of using music and stories to facilitate change, which inspired you to do this really cool tour called the Living Rooms Across America. Can you tell us about that?
yeah. Well, I believe art and stories are medicine that we all need, especially in this time that we're living in now. But for tens of thousands of years, we've been able to show our innate connection with one another through art and story. So the Living Room Across America tour really started. Um, at the time, there was like a lot of, and still, divisiveness around this issue of gun violence or gun control, whatever we want to frame it. And so I wanted to go into the heart of people's living rooms and disarm folks. And so I went to 10 of the most violent cities on paper, if you will. And we convened young people and elders and policymakers and community leaders. And essentially, I would just use music as a way to like lower everybody, and then to facilitate just a conversation so that we got to go not so much around the issue, but who are you and how are you, like what brings you into this circle? I mean, it was really, really effective. I've been blessed to be mentored by a lot of different folks, and one of them is Harry Belafonte, who was like a civil rights icon, and he would always say, Mike, always suspend your first judgment when you enter into a space. And I think that's profound wisdom, not just for then, but now. And so that, we would bring people that people would probably say like they would never get in a room together. So it might be like a judge and a police officer with a formerly incarcerated individual, but we did. And we were able to see like our shared humanity and talk about like, well, what are some shared solutions around this issue that's impacting? So it was a beautiful tour and it informed a lot of what I still do today.
That's so impactful. And something special happens when you are invited into people's living rooms and you add music and conversation and story to that. It's so inspiring.
Well, one thing I will say is like, it was inspired by the United Farm Workers movement because the way that they got folks to understand the plight of farm workers is they went into people's homes. And, it's a strategy that movements for civil rights have done forever, which is like exactly what you said. So when like going inside of someone's home is just a different energy and a different possibility and a different openness than going into an office or to a protest or whatever.
Yeah, or a big arena.
Yeah.
And using music and story as the venue to unite people in humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Because prior to written language, prior to anything else, it was the stories, it was the music. And you're providing a place for people to be vulnerable, to be safe, to express themselves without fear. And I've said that over and over. Plus, equally, you're honoring a variety of cultures or experiences or socioeconomic, which when you strip all of that away, that's what we're trying to do is remember the humanity in each other, not the differences. And I've been to, not in yours, I would have loved to have gone to one of your things, but back in the day I went to musicians that would present in homes, and then I would see them in bigger venues, and the difference in the energy and how the people in the room felt and everything. So do you find that it brought people closer together outside of that actual venue, that it inspired them to come together in unity to move forward?
I'd say yes, and I think the greatest artists know how to tap into that divinity, and whether it's a small living room or a large arena, people feel this sense of connection. And so I've definitely felt that in like this living room store. But then, I feel that when I go see U2 in a huge stadium, or I just saw Kendrick Lamar, like you see these artists and you literally feel like you're in a spiritual ceremony, if you will. I don't want to say church or mosque, but you're a part of something bigger than yourself, and you feel this connected tissue. And like you said, that is the power of the arts and the power of story. I think that the thing I will say about the intimacy of the living room or the home is that if folks have the opportunity to share their own personal story, you get to see your own reflection in that story. And you wouldn't have thought that before someone shared, right? And you can't necessarily do that in a huge arena. So it is a little different. But I think both are worthwhile of remembering, like, hey, we have this saying, I'm of Mexican ancestry. It's called in Lakesh, I am because we are. And so if we really embody that kind of philosophy, then, like, I can't do harm to you because therefore I'll be doing harm to myself. So
We need constant reminders of that, which makes me sad, but also inspires me too, because we constantly have to remind ourselves that we're all one, that we are all connected. And I feel like, as trivial as it sounds, there's very little out there that reminds us of that. Before, we would have, and again, I just said it's trivial, but we would have TV shows that would connect us. Anyone remember like Thursday night TV, and on Friday, everyone would talk about what happened on Friends or Cheers or what have you. We just don't have that. And I was really reminded of that during COVID when everyone was watching like Tiger King. And I was like, this is just indicative of how we are missing that sense of connection and being with and surrounded and infused with music, whether it is in a living room or an arena, like you said, you're at the Sphere in Las Vegas, it doesn't matter. We all feel that, which is amazing. But when I was reading over all of your work, it was just so amazing and impressive and motivating and just very, very impactful. And I read that you were president of your class at UCLA, which to me made me feel as though you've always had this in you, that you were almost born with this. Do you feel like you've always had this calling to help connect and lead others?
yeah, I will say that I was born over 2 months premature. So I always say I was a preemie baby, but I was always born fighting to breathe in this world. And I was blessed to be raised by two incredible teachers. My mom still works for Head Start, which is a federally funded bilingual education program for like low students. And my father was a professor, union president, and a professor at a college for 41 years. But my father was really instrumental in the Chicano movement in the 60s and 70s. And so from the youngest of youngest age, like my dad would take me into his classroom. I was in my car seat, baby seat, and he would just plop me down and give these polemics on like U.S. history and all this stuff. And then when I could finally walk, and even before I could walk, he would take me to rallies. He would take me to like different events. And I write in my book, there's a point where I always felt a sense of pride because I was always the youngest person in these rooms he would take me in. And then they would all joke around, oh, how cute, you have your little son with you. And I always felt, one, just wanted to be close to my dad. So it was like our shared experience. But then two, I was like soaking in all this stuff. But it was UCLA that gave me a little bit even more of a context and opportunity to, envision and work towards a different kind of university world with people from different backgrounds and identities and everything else. It was kind of like my trial and error phase, if you will. But we did a lot of incredible stuff when we were there on college campus.
Still doing.
That is, I love that because I was a single mom and I used to bring my boys, I have two sons, and I would bring them to work with me in the morning, and then they would take the school bus down to the elementary school. And they would just they knew the other teachers, they knew the building, they knew the older kids, and it was a different mindset for them to be in that environment. And they were just always part of it. And the name of your book I felt it in my heart. I have to be honest, when I read the title of your book, I literally put my hand on my heart. Sacred Lessons, Teaching My Father How to Love. How did you come up with that title? Because it encompasses so much of your work.
Yeah. I thought about it because, this topic of being emotionally expressive as someone that identifies as a man is something that's not really talked about a lot. And my two examples of what a real man was my grandfather and my father. I only had one grandfather because my mom never knew her dad, so I always grew up with just him. And what I learned from them was what I think is societally acceptable, which is to provide for your family, protect, and find your identity through your work, but you're always emotionally distant. You don't really communicate your feelings. And so when my father unexpectedly passed away, I just went into a rabbit hole of grief and pain and trying to unpack what are the reasons that led to him dying unexpectedly and prematurely. And I kept coming back to the fact that my father loved my brother and myself more than life itself, but he didn't have the vocabulary to say, I love you. Hey, Michael, I love you. And he did love me. Like, there was no doubt. And, I could count on my one hand how many times, because his own father never told him that he loved him. And he was doing the best that he could. But I believe that he passed away too young because the weight of patriarchy and unexpressed emotion changed the configuration of his body, which led to stress, hypertension, bad heart, back problems, because it makes sense. This is just scientifically proven. And so from that moment on, I just wanted to be a better father and partner and son and brother as much as I could, because there's too many men in our country, in our world, that are suffering alone, suffering in silence, and don't feel like they can ask for help.
And I have to interject with that, and we usually go back and forth with the questions, but I feel like they have changed the rules for men, but they haven't given them the new handbook. And it is a disservice, and I will say this every time: you cannot empower women if you denigrate men. And I feel that in my soul. We have to look at this as the masculine and feminine, divine in both. But I agree with you. That generation that your dad was in, it was a different culture. It was a different societal expectations. But the impact because to think that because you're gender born male or masculine or whatever, that you feel any less makes absolutely no sense.
I agree. Exactly. I mean, I've been blessed to be I'm on this 25 city tour for the book, and I've done about 6 to 8 cities already. And I will share that the response is exactly what you just said. At first, when I first started speaking, there was mostly women that were coming. And they were trying to buy the book for the man in their life, whether it was their father or their son or their partner. And it's shifted since the pub date, where there's more men lining, intergenerationally, all races, what have you. And I oftentimes say it's really not about gender. It's about energy, like you said. It's about the masculine, feminine that we all embody. And, we're living in a moment right now where the perception of what's a real man is really harmful. I remember being a young kid, and and people would ask, like in the classroom assignment, like, who's a hero that you want to write about? People would say folks like John F. Kennedy, Barack Obama, whatever. You know, it's different now. There's a different person in that position who has different thoughts of like what constitutes. And to me, I've seen that this idea of a domineering, controlling man is not just harmful to the man himself, but to everyone around him. And like you said, and I wrote the book because a lot of what's informed my thoughts on this issue has been written by predominantly like feminists and women of color in particular. But it was like Audre Lorde or Bell Hooks, and I couldn't find a book written by a man for a man really that I could relate to. I took the concepts, I agreed with the concepts, I struggled with them, but like growing up in this society, in this body at least, it's a different way of operating in the world.
What do you think today does define a man? I feel like, in our fathers and grandfathers' day, they were drafted and that would define them, or they were the main breadwinner and that would define their manhood, or maybe they were hunters and we had all these different things that would define a man. We still, the only thing I can think of today is the Jewish people have bat mitzvahs. I don't know who else has anything that defines what it is to be a man in today's culture. So how would you recommend young boys growing up start to understand what it means to be a man? And do we have to define it? Now you're a man, now you're a woman. Like, what are your opinions on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of touched on it. Like we have systemically, structurally erased rites of passage or initiation for young people. Before the Industrial Revolution, like young boys would go to work with their fathers, whether it was farming or in steel or carpentry. So similar to how I described my relation with my dad going to the classroom, that allowed us to bond. We don't have those kind of things anymore because once we went more into like a very hyper consumer materialistic society, parents come home dead tired. So the time they spend with their children is also, I also think right now we're living in a time of radical change, both economically, gender roles, identity, AI disruption. I was sharing, like, even just in the process of writing this book, there's two men in particular I'm thinking about. The person that engineered my audiobook, he worked for over 25 years for a massive movie company doing editing, and worked on the biggest films like Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, like things we've all seen. He gets laid off during the writer's strike. He's not too concerned because I've worked here for almost 30 years, Gets hired and gets laid off again. Then he ends up working at a Halloween spirit store. And his sense of worth and self, because he can't contribute to the rent with his wife. And I was the first gig he had in 2025. Or then when I did promo photos for the book, my publicist sent me some references like, oh, check out these. This is kind of the look and feel. And one of the references was my friend who's taking the photos of me who hadn't worked all year. And we are living in a time of immense change and transformation that's not hitting everyone equitably. And to the conversation around men, we are calling out rather than calling in men who feel more alone. So like the rates of depression, loneliness, suicide are astronomical levels across the board, because like what you're asking, Samantha, what defines us is no longer accessible. And so we need new definitions and we need new ways of being in community with each other. But I will say, generationally, at least what I see, I always say there's always multiple sides to a story. And yes, the statistics are alarming and they are there. But on the flip side, I'm meeting fathers every day that are holding their children tighter and saying, I love you, like very emotion expressive. See a lot more of my friends going to therapy or going like tapping into their spirit even more. You know, I see so much goodness that's not being amplified. And I think that's by design. I think that's also on purpose because if you see more men, well, just more people being better human beings, then number one, you don't feel like, well, oh, well, I could do that. Then there's a community. And I think when we isolate male experiences, then that's what leads men to feel like they're all alone. And I'll just end with this part. I've been blessed, absolutely blessed. I co-facilitate a men's circle since the end of January, every other Thursday, with men who lost their homes in the Altadena fire leave. And we consistently have 13 to 20 men come, all backgrounds, all ages. And it's like the closest I get to God every other Thursday. I leave that with my vibration and energy so high because we are so connected. We're able to cry without apology. We're able to like share without shame. And we're just holding each other, literally, physically, and spiritually. And that just completely informs how I think about this, but that kind of work is happening across the country. We just need to like talk about it more, let other folks know that it exists. But I do think, like any time in human history, we are co-creating a new world in real time. And if we can be led without fear and led with love, I feel like we'll be able to figure it out. And that's the tension that's happening literally on the streets of Los Angeles in real time, but across this world as well.
Yeah, I agree.
My mind is going like a pinball game with what you've been saying. So there's a lot jumbling around in there. And one of the things that what you ended with just a moment ago, the depth of feeling that I get from that, in that because you're addressing people, you're not saying because you're men, you don't grieve the loss of your home, you have to be strong. And this is probably not popular. If anyone has an issue with it, send it directly to me. It's not the opinion of the show. Strong women are not intimidated by emotional men that show sensitivity. And I think that, and I'm just making it men and women, but it's not about gender, it's not about choice, but we're talking about people, but also people who are comfortable with anyone else showing their emotions and being able to hold space for that is exactly what you're talking about. Is we have to reach out and help each other step up during these times. And maybe I'm way off with this, but if someone has been conditioned through genetics, through ancestral trauma, through societal expectations over and over and over, and then all of a sudden they say, okay, that doesn't work anymore. We have to give people the presence to be able to relearn communication patterns that are going to actually be effective, and to be gentle with each other while that's happening. So do you feel like a lot of this comes back to, I think, personal opinion, I think men, people who identify as people who are open to this, they're trying so hard to understand, how can I express who I am in a world that doesn't quite know how to accept that yet?
Yeah, I think that is true. You know, because what you're teasing out or calling is like there's these systems. I will call them like systems of domination or control that are manufactured.
Yes.
Race is a social construct. Gender is a social construct. But patriarchy in particular is affecting all of us regardless of gender. Because I will say, like, talking to girlfriends and friends of mine that happen to be men, we don't we say we want like more sensitive men, for example. Maybe sensitive is the wrong word, or more courageous men to show their emotions. But we're also trained not to know how to embrace that,
100%.
And I always tell folks, like, one of the things I think we all need is grace right now, because you know, for me, like to be emotionally expressive with my partner, if she did something that I felt like shut me down, that like I get re-traumatized and then I go back into my silence. And then recognizing that, they're little baby steps because everything around me as a person that identifies as a straight man is telling me that everything in this society is for my benefit, for my control, including people, women, like that's what we're conditioned to do and see and feel. And so we're really trying to like untangle all of those lies to like what you're talking about, Denise, and get to the core of like, we're all feeling human beings. We all have very similar, if not the same, happiness and joys and fears and all that stuff. And we all want to express it. And we haven't figured out, I feel like, the social container to do that equitably. And that's also for a reason, like there's a reason why, they call it man-made catastrophe in terms of climate change or folks predominantly in CEO or governmental positions, right? Like, and that's not by accident, So I think a lot of this is just trying to like untangle, like you said, centuries of a mindset and of a structure that wants to keep folks divided. And you do that by fear and being separated from who you really are. And that's unfortunately what this experiment has all been.
I imagine that writing the book was very healing for you too, in terms of your relationship with your dad and the
Yeah,
archetype of father. I'd love for you to talk about that. And I'm just curious to know too what your mom had to say about the book.
it's a good question. Yeah, it's a very hard but healing process for me. The truth is, I actually wrote a whole different book at first. I wrote a book. My dad always wanted to write a book. So I painfully listened to all these interviews he did. And I interviewed like his roommates from college and key folks in his life. And I wrote a book in his voice, looking back at his life, the last 5 days he was alive on a hospital bed. So immigrating from Mexico, being the first in his family to go to college, all these different things, being a father. And agent went out and no one bought that book. And I realized no one bought that book because I hadn't done the really deep work of healing and confronting the grief. And so once I started writing the story that you now have in the I voice, that's when I was really able to like truly like heal, not just for me, but this whole process has shown me like in my spiritual belief system, I feel like we heal not just for ourselves and our families, but for those ancestors that came before us and those that will come after. So I am a strong believer that I am more healed and my father's more healed because our relationship is so deep right now. One, I can't hide anything from him. But two, I really feel like this whole process has been him guiding me and me guiding him. And there's been these symbols and signs every part of the journey that has shown me that, the veil between the seen and unseen is really, it's not as like, it's not as hard as we think it is if you tap in. And, there's different ways to do that. But, and then the question about my mother, she hasn't read the book because it's too painful at this moment. She's tried to pick it up multiple times and hasn't. I literally told her yesterday, I was like, you don't need to read it if you want to. You live this, like, and she was able to come to the LA launch and Ventura launch, and it was sold out, a ton of people, and it literally became a shared ritual for all of us. The tears that were shed, that were medicine to help cleanse us, and all this that we're holding, and all this trauma. And again, it was just because of the power of a story. And I think so much, I think we're taught to share our individual story, but the more that we share our stories of who we are, then the more like each one of us will relate to that because there's universal themes in all of them. outside of the house may be different, but the core of the house is the same. So, but yeah, it's been
That's beautiful. And she'll read it when she's ready because you're her boy. She's going to read it, but she's still going through her own grief process. And thank you for saying that too about the veil being kind of, if I could put words in your mouth, an illusion. When we tap into that sacred space, we can feel our loved ones right there with us. And I'm sure you have felt how proud your dad is for not only everything you're doing, but for this book as well and honoring him.
Yeah. I'll share a quick thing. The last talk I did was a few days ago. The place where I grew up in Ventura. And my father's best friends were in the audience. His brothers were in the audience. His former colleagues. The person I was in conversation with is the person that he made sure got hired to take his place. And we were at a Barnes and Noble. And, like they had 20 chairs set up and 50 plus people came. And in real time, we changed everything into a circle. So we're sitting in the middle of this two-story bookstore in a circle in sacred ritual. And when I was done, his friend and former colleague comes up to me because there's books all around us. And says, "Hey, look at what was behind you, man. Look, there was a book from the Mayo Clinic, which is a big health company. And it said the Mayo Way, but my father's nickname was Mayo. And so literally this whole time, and
You can't make that up. You weren't sitting there. You asked to move everything into a circle. Oh, that's amazing.
and the most profound part was that my mother texted me that night. She said, "Mijo, I think that's your father's way of saying that he's okay. He's healed. And he might have left this world in a lot of physical pain, but that doesn't exist."
You are putting into words so succinctly and beautifully about, I really feel like we're mediums, we're very connected to that world, but that the ancestors are stepping forward because you're able to give voice to the things that they felt that they weren't able to express, and they're here to help you. So,
Right.
I mean, that gives me willies, that I know that your dad, your grandfather, your great-grand, that lineage of men, strong, kind, wonderful men, are stepping forward. And do you ever feel like sometimes you'll be speaking or you'll be kind of expressing it the way your dad would have, or brought through, like it almost feels like it's a collaborative effort with spirit for you?
Mm-hmm. It totally is. I mean, I will share when I was in New York. Right before I spoke in New York, I asked a good friend of mine to facilitate a conversation. I was like, "What chapter stood out to you?" He said, "Chapter 19, whatever he said," but it was the chapter where I first see my father cry for the first time. And right before I spoke, I asked my father, I said, "Hey, Papa, what chapter do you want me to read?" Say it in my mind's eye. And I opened up my book. It was literally that same chapter that my friend Fidel said. So I read it and get emotional. And then I'm in LA and Fidel's like, "Will you read that chapter?" I was like, then I got really emotional. So then the talk the next day, I tell my dad, "I'm not reading this one anymore, man. Like, this is a lot of emotional labor. like like and I don't want to read this. I know who's gonna be in the audience. So let me read a section where when you couldn't run no more, and your closest friend said, 'No need to run, ride a bike so you could still be in community with us and still participate in our morning routine.' I'm going to read that one. Unbeknownst to me, I'm read that. I get the most emotional from the whole torso fall and realize at the end that it's that same chapter. And so I have to laugh because it's like him saying, 'Mio, you could run away, but you'll never run away,' basically. And so, yeah, I think everything I do is definitely like in collaboration with spirit and ancestors, and I try to weave that through the book just to normalize it, because I think again, we live in a society that wants to control and dominate, and you can't control or dominate spirit. You could try to demonize practices or tools, but there's a reason why all of us, regardless of where we come from, we all have these really deep land-based ancestral practices. Whether you're from Ireland or Mexico, like there's things that we have always done to stay rooted and connected with ourselves and the land and the spirit world. And it wasn't scary. It was just how it is. And so I try to do that with my own son and daughter, just to normalize, even communicating with my father, like, yeah, why would I not? He's still with me. So.
Yeah, and that's such an important message to get out. When you were saying that about seeing your father cry, it hit me. I didn't have like a macho dad by any. If my sisters were listening right now, they'd spit out their coffee. He was definitely not like a macho guy. He was more of an intellectual, and we would call him a metrosexual. If my mom and I got manicures, he would come with us, and he'd get his nails done.
Yeah.
But I only saw him cry one time, and that was when his dad died.
Mm.
And I remember telling a guy friend of mine years ago about that, because he just is, you would think if you ever met my dad, you'd be like, oh, I'm sure he cries at, commercials. Nope, just that one time. And my guy friend said, yeah, thank God for Brian's song. If it weren't for that movie, no guy would have a reason to cry.
Wow.
And it makes me sad because I'm not a crier myself, but I do cry. And there's something cathartic. There's that old proverb like tears are the way the soul washes itself. I mean, if we don't have that permission to release our energy that way, not only are we not going to connect with our ancestors or future generational lines, forget all that, we're not going to connect with ourselves. So
Yeah.
that's just so impactful, and I'm really glad you wrote about that and are forced to continue reading about it when you go out and about.
Yeah, it's taken me, I will really say honestly, recently where, I still struggle with it, but there's one thing so for us as society to give permission to people to cry, and specifically men, that's like one element. And then the other piece that I think is even harder is for the man himself to actually do it. And, and, and the last couple times I've just had to be like, let go, because I can, it's almost like I'm watching myself in a movie. I can see myself stop myself at that point, breaking down because of all the conditioning, And I was talking about Ventura, I couldn't control it anymore. It was like years, decades coming out. And and again, like that's so beautiful because then that adds years to your life. That is like you just said, so that's the way that we cleanse. It's one of the most purifying things. It's the reason why we have these dots in our eyes and tears, like physiologically, like that's what it's meant to do. Like to help us self-regulate. And so yeah, I think it's a struggle, but I know I have to model what I feel other folks have to do. As hard as it is, because that's the only way we normalize and change norms in this country. So,
Yep.
And you're breaking the cyclical patterns for your children, no
yeah,
matter how they identify, and that's everything. Because it's
yeah,
big
it's
words.
funny because we spoke about Father Gregory Boyle on the top of the industries, and he was gracious enough to read the book and give a blurb. And he helped change the way I think about it, because even in those few sentences, Father G says, it's not so much about breaking the cycles as it is healing the cycles. Because even in the
Very
breakage,
good
it's
point.
very violent, aggressive, and masculine. But we are healing because we're healing the links that connect us to multiple lifelines, dimensions, whatever you want to call it. And so now I've gotten to this point where I'm like being very mindful. Like, I don't, I also feel like breaking is also, to me, I was like, well, if I'm breaking it, that means it's not useful or something's wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with us. We're just spiritual beings in a physical body that are all trying to heal. And I want to love up on as many people as I possibly can and say, you know, I don't want you to be anyone but who you are and who you're meant to be. Help
Mhm.
people remember that divinity and that purpose and shades.
I
Yeah.
love that distinction, breaking versus healing. That's gonna stay with me. Speaking of Father G and tattoos on the heart and homeboy industries, before we let you go, tell us about your phenomenal work with Tapito Coffee.
Yeah, so the Beat the Coffee, it's an incredible coffee company. Uh, it came to us. It wasn't something that was. I guess it wasn't not something I had planned. Um, but it's basically if you look at some of the best coffee, if not the best coffee in the world, comes from Africa and Latin America. And we saw a few coffee companies that were owned from people of Mexican ancestry. And so we started this coffee company really as a way to highlight the incredible coffee from Mexico, Veracruz in particular, but to celebrate who we are as a people and as a culture. And the other piece about it is we wanted to, even the name Pepito is named after a marketplace in Mexico City. That is, you stay away from. It's where the addicts, the houseless, the formerly incarcerated. We wanted to name our company after something that people run away from. We wanted to run towards. And the more that we started to unpack it, we realized that the Beatles, the indigenous definition of the Beatles, little temple. And so it made sense. Like the places, like like G says, we want to live our lives where we bring the margins to the center, so there's no more us and them. It's just us. And our pastries, cone, um, we hire folks from homeboy industries to provide that opportunity and a good paying job, good tasting coffee. And what I've realized is one, back to my dad, he would always go running with his friends and always have a cup of coffee in the morning before they went to work. And so coffee, like food, like music, like art, is a way that brings people together. It's almost like that Cheers. I'm not talking about that when we're dating or something, but like Cheers, right? Like everyone used to go and watch it, or the watering hole. But I see it at a coffee shop. Like this simple bean makes coffee is bringing people from all walks of life together. And what I love about it, it forces you to slow down because you have to like savor the taste of the coffee. So um, we've become more than a coffee shop. It's almost like a brand and a community. We've been able to do a lot of incredible stuff and we're expanding and excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, me too. And what a wonderful way for people to support the work you're doing
Yeah,
and have great coffee too. It's a
yes.
win-win.
It is.
When are you running for politics?
No, no. You sound like when I was at UCLA, everyone thought I was going to go into politics, and I felt like I could make a better impact on the world by trying to change culture. Because politics always follows culture. It's not the other way around. And so even on this issue of manhood or masculinity, uh, I want to lean into spaces where men are congregating to soften our hearts because no one's really reaching out to men. If you don't reach out to men, um, then they're like people that may be harmful to themselves and all of us, which I believe is happening. So uh, I want to help shift the culture and support good politicians. So I don't even call them politicians, good public servants. Um,
Much, much better. And I love your answer and I agree with you, but that's also why we want you to run for politics.
Where can people find more about you and all the wonderful offerings in your book? And because what I love about your energy is that the picture spirit is giving me is you're holding a torch, but you're not wanting people to follow you. You're wanting to light other people's torches so that they can find their way in the dark. And I know that your website is Sacred Lessons, but
yeah.
where can people find your work? Because you're amazing.
First off, thank you. And secondly, that's such an amazing description that I asked permission to use because that was absolutely true. Like, hopefully light everyone's torches so we're walking together. Well, folks can follow me online on all the social platforms. It's Mr. Mike De La Rocha, Mr. Mike De La Rocha, sacredlessons.com, thepeoplecoffee.com, revolveimpact.com. And then one thing I guess I will say is like I'm extremely blessed and humble because from Revolve Impact to the People Coffee to even this whole book journey, I'm just surrounded by incredible people that are just amazing, and we are always co-creating. This is kind of what I've been trying to really get across to folks is like we're not we are individual beings, but we're like interdependent, interconnected beings, you know, and nothing happens in a vacuum. None of the stuff I've done I could have done on my own. Do it because I have a beautiful partner and family, and people around me. So I just want to say thank you to all the folks I'm blessed to work with every single day and creating the change that we've been talking about. So yes.
Yes.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. What a beautiful conversation. I have learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners have as well. And we just wish you peace and blessings on your journey. I can't wait to see what you do next. Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Oh yeah, for sure. Thank you both.
Thank you, Mike.
And thank you everyone for listening. We will put links to Mike's social media, his book, his websites in our show notes and on Facebook and our Instagram. So please do follow and support him. In the meantime, everyone, remember as always to show up, do great work, and share your light.
Take care.